I'm Blak Douglas. I'm a career artist from Sydney, and currently my studio is located here in Bullinaming, which is Marrickville, and I've been here since the start of 2020. So I was originally from Penrith, Western Sydney, and after graduating from University of Western Sydney as a graphic designer, I landed a role in Sydney at the Australian Museum in 1997, and it was to design the then largest expose of Aboriginal art that had ever been shown in Sydney, perhaps on the continent. And it was called the Indigenous Australians exhibition. While I was on that project, I was pretty much glued to my Mac in the design department. And then we had employed an Aboriginal artist from Wollongong, and he was to paint a series of boards that were to be used as the midway point in the exhibition. And it was a maze that was to talk about the stolen generation. And I just thought it was amazing that you could be paid to be doing something like that. So it didn't take me long after leaving that position to not want to continue in graphic design, but to want to pick up a brush. Just began as a hobby on Wednesday nights and joined a small collective of Aboriginal artists, and from there I started painting murals in primary schools throughout Western Sydney, and I guess that's pretty much where it all began. By the time I realised that I wanted to become a proper artist, I'd begun making my own canvases, really trying to step it up, and had a couple of solo exhibitions in my hometown, just in random locations. Okay. And that was entering the noughties. And at that point, I had observed my hometown's ethic on art and realised that I wasn't going to go too many places fast here. Okay. So I followed the big lights of the city and moved into Sydney. And so I've been residing in Redfern, where I used to practice my art, for about 15 years now. I still look at one of my greatest mentors, Gordon Hookie, the Brisbane-based artist from Proper Now Collective, who inspired me and gave me that drive and motivation to be able to say what you want. When you look at his works, they're pretty hardcore, and I still look at people like him, Destiny Deak and Carla Dickens, as mentors and inspirations. I wake up every day with the encouragement from my ancestors, perhaps, to oppose government and to rightfully question what jurisdiction does a white man that's going bald in Canberra have over my people. Doesn't make sense, and it never will until we make reparations on Capitol Hill. And that's something that I will paint about. I've just embarked on a brand new series that is basically visually questioning monuments, and the monuments that we have remnant that get protection, like when police surround James Cook in Hyde Park, protecting that, but Twiggy Forest blows up the gorge in South Australia. We live in a farcical environment. I've been listening to a podcast just recently on a short history of humankind, and the scientists were alarmed to discover that we carry 4% DNA from Neanderthals. And so it's pretty evident that some exist quite illustriously in grey suits with a big girth and sit there in Parliament question time and berate each other and oppose illegal laws on First Nations land. Occasionally I've worked with inmates, given that we have the largest per capita incarceration rate on the planet. And so a lot of the talent and the beauty is locked up inside. So if I get the odd occasion to work with those inmates or youth in detention centres, or youth that might go off the rails where they are any given moment on this continent, and remind them that you can achieve immeasurable satisfaction by putting your comment on the wall of a gallery or getting your artwork into a major art award that sees an audience of 20 to 50,000 people. And that's way better than tagging underneath an overpass bridge and writing expletives and getting busted for it. The last thing we need is more percentage of us mob locked up inside. Yeah. So I hope that some kind of motivation or inspiration comes from the way I paint my my deep-ridden angst about what has systematically happened to my people. My art in particular, I think it carries references to spirituality and metaphors that I've created in my artworks that set a bona fide template of my works, i.e. big sun or big moon, grandfather, grandmother spirit, the mountain ranges, the marks in the landscape, whilst not immediately identified, but all landscapes, all mountainous ranges are some form of totem to local people, some sort of creation place. Yeah. And but realistically, the spirituality that I offer with gusto is the actual way that I project my imagery, and that's what I feel is my responsibility as quite literally the fire stick carrier in my family. So I'm within a strain of my immediate genealogy that I'm the last male to walk forward on behalf of my family in that sense. And so by painting what I paint, I feel that it's there's my spiritual effort, there's my spiritual input to the creative ether. I think sometimes my work is perhaps a little too further ahead in its forecasting of how I want to project my version of Aboriginal art. Right. And so we're still stuck in dots and cross-hatching, you know, so we're still stuck there. Yeah. And there's no ifs and buts about it. And it's going to be hard to break out of that whilst ever they keep putting these abhorrent East Coast styled designs on NRL jerseys and whatever other strips. And I'm this year's recipient of the NAIDOC poster award. You know, it's just like that is taking me back 20 years to what I opposed and what I vehemently defied in joining the bandwagon. And it was far too easy just to paint this kind of abhorrently plagiarised Aboriginal style of art to get your stuff over the line and get it sold. Well, I went as far left as I could possibly go from that style, arriving at what I've created. But I feel that that's, it's, in that sense, I've kind of embarked on this galactic journey way out there on a different galaxy. So as a result, my stuff doesn't find its way flying into institutions en masse. I want to stay far away from the stereotype as possible, particularly after taking myself to Papunya, to Balamboy in Arnhem Land, and looking at artists' works and going to art centres and learning and digesting about the spirituality of these different mobs of people, and coming back and asking my local brethren, why are you painting that style? That doesn't come from Wollongong, that doesn't come from Walgett, that's like just gammon dotted style. You're just taking that from desert people. And you'll hear people oppose that and say, well, nobody owns a dot. Well, it's pretty certain that the Papunya Chula movement, quasi-copywrote that style of art. And so what you find now is you find that the early Papunya boards are fetching record-breaking prices at auction, which is still withheld in wealthy white families. And then there's not hardly any encouragement for a Southeast region young Aboriginal artist to deviate from painting stereotypical dot style souvenir art, because we don't encourage that. We don't say radicalize your work. Be a Destiny Deacon, be a Linonis, be a whatever. Radicalize yourself. No, we don't teach that in schools. First thing I try to do to introduce to young students when I work with them in workshops is to think about metaphors, because that's what I do. Yeah. I paint metaphoric examples of colonization and how it affects our people. And you can make those as quirky as possible. You can make them satirical, you can make them macabre, whatever, but you choose a metaphor and then you create your theme around that metaphor. And the fact that my version is a highly contemporized example of that, it's what we did since millennia. It's what we have done for millennia, and that is that those metaphors are found in rock art overhangs and in the carvings on the coastline, on the rocks and whatever. And there's the figures in WA that nobody knows where the fuck come from. These are metaphoric examples of spirituality.
Can you give an example of a type of metaphor?
It can be as simple as a hand stencil. Just having hand stencils in an overhang is a metaphor or an example of a story that these people are telling. I mean, let's look at the spirit figures that are created just about anywhere from Wallamai, where the astrological artistic carving ground has been discovered, to the Robertson figures, so-called, in the Kimberley. These metaphoric examples of spirituality pertaining to the people from that particular area, but they're painted in a style that has people scratching their head for 200 years, like trying to figure out what's going on in this thing. And so metaphor is extremely important for myself, because not only do they entertain people who are viewing the piece, but they entertain yourself. So basically, you're painting cryptic stories about the government affecting us today, and let people figure that out. Let them try and figure that out, like people had to figure out what's on the cave walls, And so it's yes, it's a contemporized version, but it's an entertaining way of getting stuff off your chest. I've become a bit tired of the complacency of institutions here, and also the painfully tedious subordination that our First Nations curators are under, working for institutions on this continent, and the bureaucracies that ensue. And it's not helping anybody advance, and it's just boring as batshit, and I'm really over it. I've coined an analogy for some years now that the Australian art market is like the sandpit in the kid daycare centre, really, globally. And we all know it, but there are people that think they're more important than others, and they try and enforce that classism upon us emerging First Nations artists. And so whilst ever we're under the white constraint of how art gets projected here, that is First Nations art, we're fucked. And so you really need to find a dealer that is egalitarian and a dealer that is willing to project your commentary from your language group to the rest of the world. Because let's face it, how long can you project A.P. Wayland's work and Arnhem Land Barks to the international art market? It's about time that a reprieve was set, that we took the responsibility of nurturing the artists distinctly from their language groups. Too much favouritism, too much nepotism, and as I said, I'm now 50, going on to 51 this year. I'm too old for that shit. I have my sights set on international expose, beginning with New York and Berlin. I imagine that once I get that opportunity, then there might be interest generated from other places as well, other continents. And but I'm particularly interested in international expose. To all the young people who are open to it, you know, set your sights big.